one who serves and the one who prepares to serve. And mindful of that, since we are all about, and I know we have friends who discuss a revolution, but I think it's more accurate to talk about a restoration of our constitutional republic. And so as your next United States Senator on day one, it is my intent to introduce 3 pieces of legislation in the United States Senate. First and foremost, the first bill comes from Article 1, Section 1 of our Constitution, which reads as follows: all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. It's a very straightforward, no-nonsense requirement. And yet you and I look at the 20th century and we see the rise of the de facto 4th branch of our federal government, the regulatory bureaucracy, where Congress ceded its lawmaking authority to any number of regulatory agencies, some of them cabinet-level agencies in the executive branch, others created by acts of Congress at the behest of one president or another. Indeed, there's a whole alphabet soup of acronyms. I can name 4 off the top of my head: FEC, FCC, OSHA, EPA. And woe to the American who ends up on the wrong side of the regulators. You may have been through this before, where you have a dispute and you feel as if you have been subjected to a trial without the benefit of legal counsel, without the benefit of a jury of your peers, and with an honest-to-goodness, metaphorically speaking, hanging judge, an unelected bureaucrat deciding your fate or the fate of your business. So how do we get control of that? Well, that's what the Congressional Responsibility Act would do. And quite simply, it would stipulate this: we cannot stop regulators from dreaming up, promulgating regulation, but we can do this. Under our current system, the regulators dream up a regulation, there is a period of public comment, and then it is published pell-mell in the Federal Register where it carries the weight of law. The Congressional Responsibility Act would stipulate that every proposed regulation be sent to the United States House of Representatives and to the United States Senate for an up or down vote. And that way, you can hold constitutional officers accountable. Instead of the current situation where we shake our fist and wail and gnash our teeth about a bureaucracy, that way we can restore congressional responsibility and the original intent of the Constitution. Now, to be truthful, a whole lot of professional politicians on both sides of the aisle don't like this idea. Because as it has evolved, members of Congress and members of the U.S. Senate have a convenient boogeyman in the bureaucracy. And they've expanded their roles to become kind of the ambassador or your ombudsman with other elements in the federal government. And they kind of say, gee, isn't that bad? And then either they personally or someone from their office will call this unelected bureaucrat and try to persuade the person that the decision made was not in line with the original intent of Congress. Stop and think about that dynamic. It completely takes one of the tenets of our constitutional republic and turns it on its ear. It puts the power not in your hands, not in the hands of elected officials, but in the hands of those who are unelected and therefore unaccountable. Now, the left really doesn't like this idea. I would testify about it in front of the Constitutional Subcommittee for the House Judiciary Committee. And do many of you watch C-SPAN? I don't like this surefire cure for insomnia. But on occasion, You may have seen, how can I say this diplomatically, somewhat diminutive yet robust fellow, a guy named Jerry Nadler of New York State. You know, elections have consequences. I think Jerry is now the chairman of that subcommittee on the Constitution. Anyway, Jerry would get apoplectic about my idea. He'd go, well, JD, if we do that, if Congress has to approve or go thumbs down on every regulation, we won't have time to do much else. I responded, Jerry, that's a bad thing? But it's an important tool that we can utilize to reclaim our constitutional republic. Point number 2, bill number 2, and mindful of the unpleasant experience of Joe Biden, I do not want to get into his type of political plagiarism. Let me freely admit this idea comes from one of my old congressional colleagues who is retiring at the conclusion of this term, John Shadegg from the 3rd District. When John would introduce this, I think he called it the Enumerated Powers Act. I think there's a title that's a little more accurate in its description. I would call it the Constitutional Citation Act, and it would simply mandate this. For every bill introduced in the House or Senate, the authors of that legislation should cite, at the very outset of the bill, the specific provision in the Constitution that allows the legislative branch to legislate on that topic in the first place. And that is another way to restore constitutional fealty and help restore the true lines of authority directly back to you that the Constitution offers. Bill number 3. And be forewarned, this is where we traverse into an area of comparison and contrast. It can be found in Article 4, Section 4 of our Constitution, which reads, and I quote, "The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government." Now let me pause there, because I know in our midst tonight we have any number of conservative independents and maybe a few curious Democrats, and who knows, maybe even a few libertarians or vegetarians. So let me hasten to add that that description of republican is not partisan in nature. Again, calling upon the linguistic abilities of Dr. Franklin, Benjamin Franklin offered wonderful definitional analogies. A democracy, Dr. Franklin wrote, is 2 wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner. A republic is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. And although I certainly believe in our Second Amendment, I'm honored with my A rating from the National Rifle Association and the endorsement of Gun Owners of America, I don't believe Dr. Franklin was talking about bearing arms in the traditional sense. I believe he was talking about being armed, being imbued with a knowledge of our Constitution and a knowledge of our rights in a republic. And of course, living in a republic, yes, the majority can carry the day, but the rights of the minority are always respected. And there are parts of the process where the minority can make a real difference in terms of leverage and going, hey, hang on. But back to the full sentence. Article 4, Section 4. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government and shall protect each against invasion. That admonition makes it very clear that our founders understood that our security and our sovereignty depended on secure borders, depended on orderly immigration law. And here, fellow citizens, the contrast could not be clearer, because 5 years ago, while I was serving in the House, I introduced the Enforcement First Act. Indeed, here in Arizona, Senate Bill 1070 in many ways mirrors the legislation that I wanted to pass